Hey, I'm Steve Lentini, and this is the acorn brain. I've promised more about it and leadership and how small minded thinking impacts leadership in a negative way. And then how to expand into unlimited, infinite thinking and to change our ideas about what we see, our perception of things. And I think why this is important to me is I've witnessed small minded thinking taking place in companies, much to the detriment of their productivity, their profitability, their overall health, their culture. And they couldn't recognize that they were in a death spiral. And that occurred in a few of the companies. And I'll tell you those stories later. And I'm going to talk about why I think this is important for you to consider is to look at the stories that you're telling yourself that are limiting those around you. And you'll have some examples. And hopefully you'll take the journey. I challenge you to consider this and see if it makes a difference. That when you change your mind about certain things, certain people, and certain situations, things will change. But again, you have to prove that to yourself. I say never blindly follow anyone or anything. So let me lay out the story. I did some work in a company where the environment was actually hostile in some cases. And in fact, they had some hostile environment lawsuits. And it occurred because what was happening in the minds of some of the powerful salespeople and even some of the lesser salespeople, it was a team of 40 salespeople. They were like individual owners of their own company. Now, so you'd say that's accountability and that would be healthy to some degree. Yes, they were all responsible for growing their sales. And the top, say, 7 or 8 were actively growing their sales every year. That left 32 people that were either flat or declining. And even those people were berating others around them, berating the warehouse when there was a mistake, berating the manager of the drivers, berating customer service and the credit team, and even the owners. They were involved and engulfed in small minded gossip, talking about everyone, and they weren't taking the conversation to someone who could do something about it, directly to the managers of each area or directly to the owners. In fact, even the management team in meetings would listen to the owners. An idea would get expressed by someone about changing something, setting up some boundaries and guidelines around the behavior of certain salespeople. And when it was agreed upon by management, they would go back to their allies among the sales team and leak the information. So there was sabotage. But it was not even considered because it was the acorn brain. It was all small-minded thinking. That was where the detriment began. That was where the spiral began because no one even questioned their thinking or their actions. It was okay. It was an okay behavior, but it was up to the owners and the managers to corral that behavior, and no one was. There was indifference. Indifference to behaviors is a tacit approval. It's a tacit yes. And so what happened is over 10 years, the company spiraled out of control because no one was willing to set a boundary and to set an example, because even managers started displaying some of those behaviors, modeling that behavior. And what was fascinating is everyone thought they were right. So the salespeople thought they were right. They had a story to tell because none of the managers seemed to get it. And then the managers seemed like they were convinced they were right. And they were telling people the owners were wrong, the salespeople were wrong, the accounting department was wrong. So it was like this. Imagine the craziness of it. And eventually, the company was sold for a pittance of what it was worth had it been healthy, 1/20th probably. And I know that for a fact because a similar size company sold for 20 times what this company that was embroiled in conflict and in controversy and lack of boundaries, what they got was 1/20th, and the other company that was healthy got 20 times more when they sold. So think about that in terms of your own leadership and those around you. Are you putting boundaries around certain behaviors? Are you setting up a solid no to certain behaviors, even terminating people that are causing turmoil in the company? There were some salespeople going around threatening that they were leaving. And I would say to the owners, well, would you live with somebody that asked you for a divorce? Now, presuming that you'd have communication to work on the relationship, but in this case, there was no communication to work on the relationship because the owners were afraid. They were afraid. And when people threatened them, they were afraid they were going to lose the top salespeople. In fact, all the salespeople at one point in time. And they never embarked on eliminating certain people that were unhealthy in the culture. They tolerated it. They were indifferent to it. And that's where they believed the acorn brain, which was telling them, the small-minded thinker, which was telling them, they're going to leave. We're going to lose the company. And by not doing anything, they lost the company. And the thing is, it's like they couldn't see the forest for the trees. And I know you all know that saying, probably. It's likely you do. And yet, they were not aware at all. They thought they were continuing on a path of survival, and they thought they were coming up with ways to deal with the profitability of the company. And really where it was in the culture, in the health of the culture. And they had all become so accustomed to the blame game, to this lack of attention to boundaries, and they were attacking each other, making each other wrong by each different group, right? So it was sales making the warehouse wrong, warehouse making the sales wrong, customer service was made wrong by the sales team every time there was a mistake, instead of working with people, helping build them, and maybe helping the manager of customer service identify people that needed to step up and people that needed work and or people that needed to be transitioned out. But there was no healthy dialogue. None. And it ended badly. And so what you have is, what's the voice you're listening to? Is it fear? And the other question is, what are you getting out of it? So the example, the owners were listening to fear. They felt like the sales team was going to leave. But what were they getting out of it? They were getting escape from the concern, and they were also just indifferent to managing the company. They really didn't want the responsibility. So there was escape from the responsibility, and even the owners were readily telling stories about all the people that weren't working with them. And so any judgments like that, any make wrongs, any indifference to boundaries where you're not willing to step in and say, that is not a healthy behavior, and nor is it acceptable here. And if you're going to continue with that, out you go. When I got there, one salesperson who actually had a very, very small piece of the business, and he was probably with the company for 40 or 50 years, and people tolerated him because he was just considered a grouchy old man. And I walked in one day and he was dressing people down, acting horribly, very angrily at someone in customer service. And I shouted his name and said, "You, in here, now." And I said, "You do that again. It's not acceptable here. You won't be here." And he apologized to me. And I said, "Now you'll go apologize to the others." The fascinating thing is, it wasn't accepted if I were to do that with one of the top performers. And I know that for a fact because it occurred. I took on one of the top performers who had agreed to something in a meeting. And then when he was surrounded by the sales team and in a group of people that he had sway over, where he wanted to show how important he was, he denied that he had agreed to it. And I called him out on it. And the owners told me later, "Oh, you don't take him on." And that's when I realized, okay, the challenge was indifference to bad behavior and indifference to the responsibility of running the company, escape from the concern. So think about that. Where is it that you don't have clarity of what's occurring? Where is it that, for example, you don't have your priorities in order or perspective? And perhaps you need someone to come in and look at the culture and give you their honest assessment without any judgment, meaning you ask them to say, "What do you think is the challenge here?" You invite them to, and then listen. Listen. And in the case of these owners, they were unwilling to listen to people because it had been done that way for many years. And what they missed was, this was a third generation company, was that the second generation and the first generation did have exemplary leadership style. People in the company actually told me stories about the second generation, their fathers. People were afraid to step out of line when they worked for their fathers. They held people accountable and they stood for a certain boundary around behaviors within the company, respect for one another. And so when you think about small-minded thinking, how I came to this story is that on November 13th, 2002, I was doing a seminar. Never had any health challenges. The next second, I needed an ambulance. Literally 1 second fine, the next second needed an ambulance. 5 days later, I had a near-death experience, an anterior myocardial infarction. Look it up. And I had also survived up until that day acute necrotizing pancreatitis. I had a blockage and still do in my pancreas. And in intensive care, 1 second on the 5th day, the next second, one with everything and nothing. Literally, we should call death what's next. And I believe everyone should experience it. However, I can't be sure they'll come back like I did. And I certainly hope you don't experience it before this video is over, or the end of the day, or the end of the week, the end of the year. I wish you all many, many years. But I can tell you that on the other side, there was none of this small-minded thinking. None of what we think because of our hubris and our ego. None of what we think. No judgment. No races. No sexes. Everything was one. I was one with everything and nothing. One with the infinite. Science and Nature has an article posted in the last few weeks, which is interesting. If you Google Science and Nature, where physicists and neuroscientists are positing, by the way, they're suggesting that we go to another universe, that we do in fact exist, that our consciousness exists, the soul exists. Now, I don't have the answer to that. I only have my experience. Literally, 1 second in intensive care, the next second, one with everything and nothing in another universe, unlike anything in the physical existence. And when I did come back in my body. So I had a near-death experience, and the comedian Frank King said to me the other day, "Oh, Steve, you clearly lack commitment." That's why it was near death. When I came back in my body, and I was asked the question, stay or go, and my consciousness responded with, "Thy will be done." Whatever was next was okay. I was right back in my body, and there came, in this physical existence, in my body, all these thoughts about how I was going to pay the rent. Little did I know how I was going to pay my mortgage. I owned a farm and I rented an apartment in another city. I was out of work 6 months and in the hospital 60 days straight and 40 of the next 60. And came back all of those thoughts that we don't have on the other side. But that taught me that's our job here, is to overcome small-minded thinking and to look at where we want to escape. What is it? What concern do we want to escape from? And what do we get out of it, escaping? We need to take on ourselves first, our own small-minded thinking, to begin to look at that, to develop a level of thinking above our thinking. Because after all, who is the thinker of the thought? You can manage your thinking. And yet, oftentimes, the automatic thought or the acorn brain leads to the automatic response, and often they're not healthy outcomes. I think deep down, most of you know what I'm talking about, that you've had those reactive moments, those thoughts judging someone, whether they've made a choice about their sexual preference, or you judge someone standing in line that's going too slow, or you judge someone in traffic, and you have an angry reaction in the moment, something that takes you away from what's really so. You can manage your reaction to it. On a leadership level, it's modeling infinite thinking, limitless thinking, and to begin to investigate, where are you with small-minded thinking? Where are you not stepping up to take on a challenge? Maybe you're not speaking up with your team. Maybe you're afraid somewhere. What happens is that you end up in a death spiral and you're not even aware of it. Now, that's not true for all companies. Some survive the conflict. Some survive the lack of boundaries. But how much more productive and healthy and profitable would your company be if your team treated one another with respect and learned about different personalities, how to respond to different personalities, even how to work with people we don't like? That's called self-awareness, expanding our emotional intelligence, our emotional quotient. And there's lots of programs on that. There's lots of learning on that. I'm not trying to sell any of my programs. What I want people to do is to look at how small-minded their thinking is. And what are you modeling by gossiping in the company instead of going to the manager or the leader and challenging them? That's called a complaint with a request. So you take the complaint, or i.e. the gossip, that you might share with someone who can't do anything about it. That's water cooler talk, office talk, Friday night talk at the watering hole or the restaurant, or on the phone, kibitzing with another teammate who's not in a position to do something about your complaint. That's called just complaining. It leaves you powerless. It sucks the energy out of the person you're complaining to, by the way. Think about that. When someone brings you a complaint just to talk about a coworker, another department, the boss, the owners, how do you feel if you're not directly in charge or responsible for doing something about it? It's energy draining. At least it is for me. So my suggestion is always take your complaints to someone that can do something about it, to the manager, the supervisor, the owner, the president. It doesn't matter who you take it to as long as they're the person that can do something about it. If you take it to someone that can't do anything about it, it's just gossip, then it matters. Because there's an energy in communication. So when you do speak up, you're providing a path for the energy to clear, a resolution to the problem. It means that you've taken it to someone who can do something about it. Now there has to be a dialogue. How do we fix this? Gay Hendricks, in his book, The Big Leap, talks about communication being an energy, a law of physics, and that when it's unspoken, you've broken the law of physics and that people can sense it. Have you ever sensed people withholding from each other, where perhaps there's a passive aggressive anger? Maybe people don't make eye contact in a meeting. They shut down. When people don't speak up, it's sensed anyway, and it's very negative. And in the story that I just laid out, it was like you could cut the knife of tension. You could cut the tension with a knife in that company. And many people remarked about it. Outsiders would come in, other salespeople, other leaders of other companies say, what's going on here? And it had been going on for years, and management did not address it. And the reason managers didn't address it is because the owners were indifferent. They were escaping from the concern, escaping from the responsibility, escaping from the truth, which was they preferred not to manage the company. They preferred not to own it. And eventually, that's what occurred. So how do you overcome small-minded thinking? One, develop a level of thinking above your thinking. And there's great resources about that. Are You Ready to Succeed by Dr. Srikumar Rao. Wise Mind, Open Mind by Dr. Roland Alexander. And they talk about ways to notice your own small-minded thinking. By the way, they didn't have a near-death experience. They just noticed how unhealthy it was in their own lives and in the lives of others, and embarked on this work. In The Big Leap, Gay Hendricks, as I mentioned before, talks about what are your upper limit problems. If the owners of this company had read that book, hopefully they would have identified where their upper limit problems were, the habit of not taking things on, and probably learned where they learned it. They no doubt learned it at home. Perhaps there was a lot of things that were unspoken at home, things that just weren't dealt with because maybe their fathers were escaping from concern at home, or their mothers. But that unspoken energy was picked up by the kids. Now, I don't know that for sure, but that's something that Gay Hendricks talks about in that book. But there's other areas that he talks about to help people identify their own upper limit problems. So begin with developing a level of thinking above your thinking. Notice first where you react. Notice first, what are you resisting? What makes you so uncomfortable? If it's in fact an energy that you feel within your own company, inquire of yourself about it. And then have a dialogue. Start to speak to people about it. Hey, I can feel and sense an energy here it feels like you're upset or angry, or there's something that we need to address in the company. Let's get it out on the table. And then get the commitment from everyone around you to address it. And once you begin to notice your default patterns, I call them, what you automatically go to, where you automatically get angry, where you have that automatic response, you can instead notice the thought, put a delay in. Maybe it's breathing. Maybe it's not a decision. Maybe it's, I'm angry and I don't want to discuss it right now, but let's discuss it this afternoon. Where you have some honest discussions instead of hiding it. instead of hiding it. Then notice the difference. And perhaps it's an outsider that comes in to help, someone who can see the forest for the trees, and that you surrender to the advice. You notice where you're defending, where you're judging, where you're angry. Those are all small-minded thoughts. Where you're not willing to put clarity in and be precise about how you want things. Maybe you're not speaking up. Maybe that's your small-minded thinking. It will make a difference, and you have to prove it to yourself. Simon Sinek says that if we don't understand people, we don't understand business. And that's another place where the owners of this business in this story either didn't understand people or preferred not to understand people. And their indifference in that led to this hostile environment, this out of control behavior over 10 years. And culminated in the death spiral. And it was fascinating because 6 months before they weren't talking about it, a year before they weren't talking about it, 2 years before they weren't talking about it, perhaps even 3 or 4 or 5 years before, had they been willing to go to the sales team and say, we're in a death spiral. We need your help. We have to address, the environment in the company, how we treat each other, and the profitability of the company. We need your help to make the company healthy. They never had that conversation. Never had the conversation. So I never want anyone to come to a moment of clarity at the end of anything. My speech coach said that we all come to a clarity at the end of something. Like I came to a clarity at the end of what could have been the end of my life, that near-death experience. But that he also said we come to a clarity at the end of a relationship, at the end of a career, at the end of an experience, maybe a negative experience, but we come to a clarity about something we could do or could have done. And I never want anyone to come to a moment of clarity at the end of everything or the end of anything. Think about that. Prove it to yourself. Is it time to take yourself on? Simon Sinek also said that there's not a score in business. It's not a I win 4-3. Is that going on in your company? Ask yourself, is one team trying to beat the other? Are managers trying to beat the owners? Are salespeople trying to beat everyone around them? It's an infinite game, or it could be, unless you get sucked into the death spiral. But if you're playing the infinite game, you're always looking at what you can do differently, the health of the company, what's unspoken. You have an open mind, not a closed, narrow mind. You overcome the acorn brain thinking. And I have to tell you, it's a journey. It's not a destination. It will always try to creep back in. If you have any questions, you can email me, steve@stevelentini.com, steve@stevelentini. I'll spell it L as in Linda, E-N as in Nancy, T as in Tom, INI.com. I'm glad to help. Thank you.